All right, so this is going to be our first series of proper video lectures. There are going to be 3 of them that I'll cover in a moment. In this section, we're covering an introduction to what sociology is and the sociological imagination. So in this first video, we're going to go, what is sociology? Thinking about society and comparing it to other social sciences. In the next one, we're going to do a little history, think about some key thinkers and the history of it, but also think about the history of sociology as something that we can look at sociologically. And look at one of the key conflicts between our individualistic thinking and how sociology tends to challenge that. And then our third and last official video, we're going to look at some of the basic perspectives. Basically ideas on how to think about society and then how to study it. So revisiting our last selection of videos, just remember how to do well in this course. Do the reading. These are not going to replace lecture. These are, replace reading. These are going to supplement and complement. But do the reading. There's lots of terms and notes that you want to have ahead of time. Take notes during these, ask questions during discussion periods when we're all together. Note key concepts and ideas. These are ideas that kind of draw together different aspects of our lives in a more abstract way. Do the assignments and communicate. If you're struggling, if you have issues, if you're unclear, email, reach out via GroupMe. Do whatever you need to do to make sure you succeed. All right, so sociology. We talked a little bit last time about how we can break this down into 2 different parts of the word. One is the soc part, meaning society, and the logos part, meaning knowledge. So building knowledge of society. Science is fundamentally about creating knowledge. What do we mean when we talk about science? Well, for one thing, unlike something like philosophy or common sense, science is about gathering systematic, what we call empirical evidence. What this means is that instead of saying, well, I think more Caucasian Americans or white folks wear masks because I kind of looked out my window and saw some more wearing masks, I might go outside and actually look. And I have to do that systematically. I can't just go look at one street corner because if it's in a mostly white neighborhood, I'm only going to see white people. So it's both, what it means to be empirical is to actually get evidence, to go and, in the technical version, to observe what is going on. Not to sit back and to think we already know what we know. We get evidence. Right? And we do this particularly about society. But what does that mean? In one of the discussion videos someone posted, someone talked about how our ideas of what's attractive and beautiful, it's kind of that comes from society. And that's a great example of it. But where do we see that? Where do those ideas come from? Fundamentally, the idea at the core of this is that we are social. Meaning what, once again? Does it just mean personal interactions and going out for drinks? That's what we usually think of as being social. But social fundamentally means relations between individuals and society. And this is where we really start. We look at connections between people, not just at parties or at events, but in all kinds of contexts, and we'll see in terms of institutions and organizations. So we're going way beyond just these very, very happy people in the workplace. I don't know why they're all so happy. I mean, most of us at work aren't that damn happy, but whatever. It's also a very diverse workforce. So when we think about society, we're talking about the organizations and things that really connect individuals to one another. Right? So sociology is one of the social sciences. Among them are anthropology, history, psychology, economics, political science. Sociology, in a sense, actually encompasses aspects of all of these, and it's maybe a bit broader than all of them. Anthropology is pretty close. They look particularly at culture. But in sociology, we'll see, we look at politics, we look at political structures, we look at social psychology, we look at how what goes on in our heads and how we feel and think is connected to the people we're with and how we're raised. We look at economic issues. We look at how poverty affects our ability to choose to not to go to work during a giant pandemic, for example. We look at political choices. So sociology, in some sense, is a much broader social science than the rest of these, but it's also somewhat different. We don't focus on what's inside the individual like psychology or often economics does. It's true of political science a bit too. We really look at historical and social forces outside of the individual and how they shape human behavior. So one of the issues people often have is this just common sense? The idea that, yeah, sure, somebody poor is going to have to go to work. But often sociology isn't common sense. In fact, it often can refute our common sense. Many of us have the idea that people will make rational choices. If we're faced with a choice between going to school and dying, most of us choose not to go to school, we'd think. And yet, many students and many teachers have had to weigh these decisions, and they haven't really necessarily done so in a rational way. There's much more a desire for emotion and connection and for environment that goes way beyond being rational. We'll look at rational choice theory a bit in the third video, actually. Often, again, what sociology does when we gather systematic evidence is we can sometimes confirm our common sense, things we think might be true about the world, but we can also disprove them. Many people think that there's more criminal activity during a full moon. And how do we go about finding that out? Well, one group of sociologists look at all the different studies looking at crime and full moons, and they found out that there is no systematic evidence for it. So in that instance, our common sense is kind of disproven by actual systematic science. We'll get into scientific methods in the next module. So as we study society, we kind of break this down into different kinds of social relations, culture, and groups and organizations. So social relations are all around us. They're kind of the fundamental thing in sociology. This can be something like an employment contract. That's a relationship between you and your boss. It can be the relations between you and your friends, you and your teachers, you and an organization. What is an employment contract but that? Relations change over time. They can have more or less power within them. Gendered relations often have power and assumptions within them. Men assume in the workplace, for example, that women are less competent, and so those can be very kind of tense social relations to deal with. Culture is a big part of what we study. Going back to the question of, how do we get beauty standards through our society? Well, that comes through culture. A lot of the time we think of this in things like music videos and things we produce, like music or art. But this also means our norms around behavior. Right? So if you think of the pop female artists of color, for example, and you look at their skin tone, you'll notice that many have lighter skin tones. This is in part transmitting ideas about what is beautiful in society to us. That's how we get that message. Sometimes through music videos, sometimes through magazine covers, through Instagram posts. All of this falls under culture. We'll spend a whole section thinking about culture. And also groups and organizations and institutions. Groups can be, friend groups. They can be very informal. Or they can be something like a school, a big institution that's a complex organization. We spend a fair amount of time studying this. These organizations and institutions really structure most of our everyday lives. A lot of the stuff you're going to be doing in classes is going to be structured by all of these. So this is all the kind of stuff we're going to be looking at in this class. And all of this really applies to our everyday life. What we're dealing with the pandemic, what we're dealing with the current political state. All of this comes down to culture, social relations, and these larger groups in society. And we'll be analyzing them in very current ways throughout.